Okay, so hello everyone. It's good to have you here. So we have the chance to have two visitors from actually the same side of the world, Salt Lake City in the US. So Jordan will start to present us his job, his work. So basically, he did a master science of biomedical engineering. Then you worked almost 8 years in Host.
That's correct.
So Host is a company. So Host helped us a lot to design the platform that we have and to buy all the things that we have and to transfer knowledge to Sébastien. So it's a pleasure to have Jordan now here with us during the last. You arrived when last month? No.
Yeah, last month.
Last month.
It's been 5 weeks.
So in addition to his biomedical background, he's now studying medicine. So you are in the 4th year of medicine, so
Correct.
Still 2-3 years, 4 years more?
Many years.
Many years. Okay.
9 years left.
So, but the floor is yours. You can present.
Okay, thanks so much, Remy. Nice to be here, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity to present to you a little bit about me and what we did while I was here at Lyric. I want to be really candid with this presentation and hopefully share a little some tidbits on things that you can do as PhD students, researchers, to really accelerate the progress of your devices and things. So I titled my talk, Turning Lyric into an Innovation Powerhouse, because that's what we're trying to do here. So first, a little bit about me. This is the Johnson family, but I did my bachelor's and master's, as Remy said, in biomedical engineering and specialized in biomaterials and cardiac electrophysiology. I'm now pursuing a career in medicine to be an EP doctor, just like Pierre one day, hopefully. And I'm in my 4th year of medical school and many years on the horizon. And I'm a principal engineer at OST Group, OST Development, which is a small team that specializes in getting devices from concepts like drawing it on your napkin to a first-in-human study in less than a year. So we go really fast and try to accelerate the process. I personally lead a team of 8 engineers, 2 regulatory specialists, and 20 technicians. And we do devices in EP, CT surgery, neurosurgery, orthopedics, endocrinology, all kinds of spaces. My journey of trying to juggle medicine and engineering started when I was actually a young church missionary. At 19 years old, I was living in Taiwan. And someone I met was a doctor and knew I wanted to be a doctor one day. And he took me in to observe a congenital heart surgery. And there was a little baby named Olivia there who, during the surgery, they nicked a portion of her hip bundle. And for the rest of her life, she had to be on a pacemaker. And I left as a really young 19-year-old thinking, I want to solve that problem. I want to make sure it doesn't happen again. And so right when I got home, I started to dissect and perform autopsies on children that had similar cases. And I really started to characterize where the AV node and SA node, in panel C here, that's an AV node picture in cross-section, and panel D is an SA node. And really trying to understand how deep these things were and what we could use to maybe image those structures. And so again, we trying to identify what to image during surgery. This is some cross-sections of the AV node. If you look in panel A up there, that's like the slow and fast pathway areas of the AV node. B is the compact node. C is where it starts to penetrate into the lower muscular septum, and D is the hip bundle. So we're trying to see the depth of the structure if we were to image during surgery. And then we did some very simple analysis on the superficial tissue overlying the AV node and SA node. And what we found was that we could use the structure, the morphology of these cells, and I'll just skip through this pretty quick here, basically showing, so everything's all spaced a little weird now, but the normal working myocardium cells and tissue were very structured. We knew exactly what it looks like. And when you got into conduction system cells, you get spindle arrangements that are intertwined and entangled. And we were able to use that to design my first device, which was an imaging, intraoperative imaging microscope. I worked with Dr. Aditya Kaza to pioneer the use of confocal microscopy, which you would hold on the heart and you would be able to see the difference between working myocardium, as you see in A and D with this microscope, and sinus node, AV node structures in B, C, and the other panels, hoping to solve that problem of not having to need a pacemaker after these surgeries. And that kind of jump-started me into a career of engineering. 8 years now so far. Here's some recent successes which I've had. I was a principal engineer with with Farapulse on the design of the Farapulse sheath and catheter system. That one has a close place to home here at Lyric. Recently, we just did the Abbott CPS Locator 3D delivery sheaths, and this was a cool success because we did this in 6 months from concept to commercialization, so very fast. Another one of my new baby, I'll say, is one called SoundPass, where we're putting a small ultrasound transducer on the tip of a neurosurgery stylet that's used to push things into the brain in different positions. And we're able to give surgeons a trajectory line of where they're going. So here's some recent successes which we've done. So I want to kind of flip it and talk about how we go from ideas here at Lyric. So you have an idea, you're researching something in depth here. Now, what do you do? And I've been here at Lyric for 5 weeks now, and here's just a small list of ideas that I've heard bounced around. Sorry, it's going off the page because of formatting and things, but, and I don't even speak French. And the list here at Lyric goes on and on. There's ideas all over the place. So what do? There's different paths to success that you can take. One is you can bootstrap in academia. You can get this non-dilutive funding from France or from the United States. You can get your grants in. You can continue to push this down the winding road. I have a few projects that have done that. That microscope I just showed you is still, in clinical trials at Harvard, and kind of going down this bumpy road of staying in academia. I think I want to propose another pathway to you that I think we're doing a lot better here at Lyric and with OST. And that's a path that kind of looks like this, that's aiming for an industry partnership where you can have these boosts along the way to really accelerate what you're doing. It's tricky because industry is always changing what they want from you as researchers and from those who have the ideas. One way I like to describe this is there's a varying level of validation for each idea. A few years ago in 2010, there was a company called Ardian. This was a renal denervation technology that was purchased really early in the validation process. They had like a couple animal studies, and Medtronic said, we want in on this right now. And so very early in the validation process, they were purchased, and Medtronic helped them out. A few years later, Farapulse, the one that you know a lot about here at Lyric, went a lot farther before Boston Scientific bought in. They had many human trials that Pierre was involved with and many animal studies that we did here before Boston Scientific purchased them. Just recently, a big device called Shockwave was just purchased by Johnson & Johnson for $13.1 billion. And this was kind of the high end of validation. Shockwave had 3 to 4 years of revenue from their devices that they manufactured, that they proved worked. They were selling to doctors in their own network and distributing. And then Johnson & Johnson came in to buy it. And we kind of see a history of this type of purchasing pattern with industry. And so it's good to know as researchers where industry is at right now. I expect right now these big companies that can help you with your research and to help move things along are looking for revenue right now and sales right now. But in a few years, it'll be a bit back down the trough again, where you can just have a great idea and they'll want to hop on and help you out. I'm so sorry about this formatting here, but I think 2 things I want to talk to you about today. Keys that you can boost your research with industry. The first one is to partner early with industry. That's something we're trying to do here at Lyric. Another one is to win concept phase. I want to explain these 2 things here. First, to partner early. Something here we're trying to do at Lyric with Pierre and OST, the company I work for, is to collaborate early on projects. This helps us as engineers really expand our network, see ideas, and it helps you as researchers to have engineering expertise right at the beginning. We helped form your platform innovation lab here with custom equipment and expertise, supplies, things like that, so you can build really quickly. And so partnering early is something that can really help get your ideas off the ground. Another thing is to win concept phase. If I were to really simply break device design into 3 phases, it would be concept phase, which ends usually around your first design freeze, where you have your first successful series of animal studies, and you have decided that these essential elements are all we need. Another thing is, after that, you go into what's called design and development phase, where you're doing lots of iterations of your design. You're trying to get to that first in-man study when all your testing is done and you're ready to show the world that this is going to work in humans. And then the final phase is after your first in-man study, you transfer this to manufacturing, you get approval from regulatory bodies, and you start to validate your device. But this concept phase, this golden time, 3 to 12 months from your first idea, is crucial if you want to get your innovation out into the world. Great ways that you can win concept phase are to clearly illustrate the novelty of your idea and the potential of the idea. Perform a detailed market analysis. I can't tell you how many times I've had someone come and say, like, this idea is cool, you know, it works. But as soon as they do a market analysis, they understand, like, there's not a huge volume throughout the world, or someone's already done it before and tried it before. So doing a market analysis is really important. Third is build quickly and fail early. And that's something I've been trying to do these last 6 weeks here at Lyric, is to help Sebastian and the crew here with the platform be able to build your ideas and get them off the ground as fast as possible. And the last one here that we can't really see is implement design for manufacturing, or DFM, very early in your design. I want to illustrate that here with a couple ideas of what we've done in these 6 weeks. So one of the projects I've worked on these last 6 weeks is with Zach on a novel atrioseptostomy catheter. Basically, during transposition of the great arteries, doctors want to cross the intraatrial septum and with a balloon and pull it and open that foraminal valley open so it stays open longer in these children. Unfortunately, there's some issues with this. It's a very low volume. There's only about 10,000 cases a year in the world. And there's multiple competitors that have okay solutions. They're not designed specifically for this, but they work okay. And so doctors have got around it for many years. And it's led to, you know, one of the best devices just coming off the market because they weren't making any money. It was very expensive to manufacture. So it's kind of a novel problem. And at first glance, you probably wouldn't engage in this project because the volume is so low. But by adding a few very cool technology features, we're able to kind of branch this out into many different markets. So here's a look at this new redesigned balloon catheter, which we're doing here. It has improved braid and extrusion transition, so better feel and handleability from the doctor. It's a very simple regulatory process. We're finding alternates to latex balloons, which are often used in this. We're trying to make it as inexpensive as possible. And the cool one at the very bottom there is we're adding echogenicity, which has not been done in this field. One way we're doing that is, this is a section of the extrusion under the balloon of this catheter, is we're mixing in these really small glass beads that are filled with air, these glass spheres, into the plastic and the extrusion. That kind of looks like this in the bottom right corner. And this air that's trapped inside that extrusion will add echogenicity to just the area under the balloon. Here's some looks at, in about 2 weeks, with just materials we've had on hand here at Lyric, without any specialized materials, what we were able to build the first prototypes of this balloon catheter. And we improved the shape set and tested multiple catheter stiffness profiles in just a couple weeks here. Another cool one I want to talk about is this new VT PFA catheter that we're doing with Pierre. Here's a look of what the design was supposed to be like. And just recently, we were able to complete this prototype with samples and, again, materials that we have here, just pulling things together as quickly as possible. A couple of things that are really interesting about this catheter is that the electrodes are designed to be the most affordable in the world. If you looked at any other PFA catheter, they're using lots of platinum, lots of gold, many parts, hours and hours to assemble these catheters. Pierre has had ideas to just use the nitinol splines that are used to make this basket and expose select areas of that so that they can be the special electrodes. And it also has 3 very unique conformations so that we can use it as a tip point-by-point ablation catheter. We can lay it on its side against tissue and get a line ablation. And we can also form it into a basket, a lot like Farapulse or other catheters like that, and really get a deep spherical type ablation in the tissue. So lots of cool things that we can do there. Another project we've worked on these last 6 weeks is Lyric's new reusable coronary sinus catheter with Remy and Jocelyn. This catheter is these catheters have been around for a long time. But Jocelyn and Remy, they want to make something that can be reused, that's sustainable, that's wireless. And so they're bringing lots of these ideas together. And in just 4 weeks here, we were able to train Sebastian on how to do electrode catheters and put this prototype together as far as we could. It has very durable platinum electrodes to withstand multiple flexes, improved shape adaptability so that the doctor can change the shape and for really difficult to reach CS anatomy. We're putting an accelerometer on the tip of this catheter so that they could see respiration, gating, any movement of the body, instead of using very expensive induction coil sensors, which are commonly used in these catheters. And they're planning on wireless signal processing on the back end. So Sebastian's built a handle and things to incorporate that. Finally, one of the last projects I've worked on here in these last 6 weeks is this new MR compatible catheter with Bruno. Bruno has an idea to do MR mapping of the atrium and ventricles. And to do this, they have to get a fixed shape copper antenna into the heart. And originally, most catheters that go into the heart are just filled with stainless steel, braid, pole wire rings, pole wire coils, all types of things. And so we had to completely rid this catheter of any stainless steel. And what we've done since I've been here is we had liquid crystal polymer threading made, which forms the braid construction of this catheter. And we're designing a steering mechanism with no stainless steel. And what this does is, if you look over here, we in the top right corner, anything that has steel in it forms artifacts in the MR field and kind of can obstruct views in there, like you see down here in the bottom. And using LCP, we're able to build prototypes here in the last 6 weeks that have no imaging artifact and have no magnetic attraction to the magnets and things. We're moving right along with this project. Before I got here, they were using a Foley catheter, and they would open this Foley balloon with copper wires around it and try to fix that shape and put that into their magnetic field. This was originally planned to be a 30 French catheter, which is 10 millimeters. That would be like probably 2 or 3 of these cords right here being forced into your femoral vein. And so over the last few weeks, we've been able to refine the contents of this catheter and get it down to about 9 French right now, which is a huge improvement. And we have a novel flex circuit antenna, which is being made currently, so that they can construct that shape and keep it how they need it. So you can see by building really quickly and using these resources, which you now hear at Lyric, we're able to prove out a few problems, increase the manufacturability of these projects, and also by failing really early with these prototypes, you're able to understand what other novel ideas are out there that you can add to maybe patents or the things that you're doing. I just want to end with a quick thank you to Lyric. It's been a wonderful 6 weeks. Thank you, Pierre and Sebastian, for taking care of me while I've been here. And I'm very grateful for the connections I've made here with all the researchers. And I think that Lyric is in a wonderful place now with the platform connections with OST and training of your employees here to really take any idea you have quickly to a prototype and to prove it out and hopefully make a connection with industry to boost things along. Thank you for your time.
Wow. So you are not only a brilliant engineer, I'm sure a brilliant doctor, but you are also your vision on how to make things work. Well, I'm very impressed. Thank you for this very nice presentation. Any questions in the audience? Right?
You mentioned it's very important to find the industry partner. Can you go a little more in detail
Yeah.
into how to do that?
For sure. There's a few ways you can do it. Let's go back here. Oh yeah, sorry. So partnering early with industry has a couple forms. One is you can, like Lyric here has this standing relationship with an industry partner in OST, which just has a network of companies that are coming in, looking at products and looking to acquire these products. Another way you could do it, though, as a researcher, is to notify people at different companies of your progress. Like if you have a wonderful animal study and you're seeing good results, shoot an email off to a connection you may have that works in industry and just be like, this is really cool. I can't explain all the results right now, but this is coming along. And just by getting more eyeballs from industry on your project early on, increases the success you'll have of getting funding from them in the future. So.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm working with Bruno, and I just have a question on MR catheter compatible. Of course, it's a problem to have some artifact during acquisition, and you choose very specific polymer. Did you study also the absorption of temperature? Because sometimes with implant on MR scan, we have some local increase of temperature, and I don't know if it's something that you are looking.
Yeah, no, we're looking at that right now. We're making sure that the flex circuit copper that's contained in the antenna itself does not, produce enough temperature to cause damage. We've also done tests in the MR magnet now with the LCP shaft and haven't seen any increase in temperature. And so that's definitely on our radar. Yeah. Thank you.
Other questions? No. So thanks again.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Thanks for being here. So Jake, thank you also for being here. So you spent a month here with us. So Jake is from Salt Lake City as well, Utah University, from a very famous group. We work a lot with them. One of the guy we know quite well is Rob McLeod from there. So Jake is a postdoc student now, and he came here to help us to work on the experiments, to design electrodes. And you have also very strong background in biomedical and bioengineering, and it's very good. So I hope at some point in France we will have same thing than you in Utah, in the US, to have this very strong training for biomedical engineering, because I think we don't have the chance to have strong students in biomedical engineering. So when we hear you speaking about your job and your background, on my side, I'm very impressed. So I hope we will have the same in France someday. So, Jake.
So, yeah, thanks everybody. I'm going to try not to ramble too much, but we did run an experiment today and my brain does get a little frazzled after those, so bear with me. So today I'm going to talk about a little bit of the research that I've been doing back in Utah on applying computational models of atypical left atrial flutter. So first, a little background to get us all oriented. As I'm sure we're all aware, under normal conditions, electrical activity propagates from the sinoatrial node through the atria to the atrioventricular node, then through the ventricles. And that makes the heart go boom, boom, makes the blood pump, right? All good. Unfortunately, this doesn't happen in everyone. Through some manner of circumstance, either through remodeling due to a different arrhythmia or due to genetic factors, et cetera, sometimes the heart develops a proarrhythmic substrate, such as fibrosis. And this can develop into various types of arrhythmia. In this case, I'm highlighting atrial arrhythmias. And a common one among those is atrial fibrillation. Right. So the patients will develop some sort of a substrate and then they'll develop atrial fibrillation, or maybe in the other order. Either way, they somehow end up with chaotic activity in the atria, which gives rise to an irregular heartbeat and has lots of comorbidities that we don't necessarily want. So the most common treatment for this is to stick a catheter in there, like the one Sebastian was showing us, or Jordan was showing us, and that Sebastian builds up in the platform, and to ablate the tissue, right? So create lines of scar and burn And usually you have to, go through and ablate several places in the atria in order to create these kind of lines of scar tissue, and then hopefully return the tissue back, or the heart back, to a sinus rhythm. Now, as many of the clinicians will tell you, sometimes this doesn't work the first time, and sometimes these scars themselves can actually become substrates for subsequent arrhythmias. This is the case with atypical left atrial flutter. It is a very common complication of ablations for atrial fibrillation. And so one of the things that we seek to do in our lab is to try and apply computational modeling to patients with atypical atrial flutter to see how we can subsequently treat them, because the most common treatment for atypical atrial flutter is to come back in and get another ablation. However, the problem with that is that, if the patient presents with one particular flutter arrhythmia, right, let's say it's circling around one part of the atria, and you go in and ablate and terminate that circuit, a week later they come back with a new circuit, right? And then you have to send them under anesthesia again and again and again. And this is very hard on the patient. It's very expensive. It's very time consuming, et cetera, et cetera. So ideally, you'd like to know all the possible flutter circuits this patient is going to have ahead of time, and try and design an ablation plan that's going to account for as many of them as you can. At least that would be the ideal scenario. So how do we do this? Well, usually in these patients, we have some sort of medical imaging from ahead of time. Usually in this particular case, we ask them to go get an MRI a week or two before they come in for their flutter ablation. And specifically, we have them to get a late gadolinium enhanced MRI so that we can have not only the anatomy of the atria, but also the substrate information, so the presence of scar and fibrosis. Now, the assessment of scar and fibrosis from LG MRI is a complicated topic that I'd love to talk about if someone wants to ask me about, but I'm going to glaze over it real fast here. Suffice to say, somehow or another, we can get this substrate information from the MRI, and we can get the shape of the atria from the MRI. We can then take this MRI, now computational model that we've generated, which, I'll put up the anatomical markers in case you're not so familiar with looking at blobs. And we can do some simulations on it, right? So you can see in this particular case, this was from a human patient that we had come into our clinic. They were presented with atypical left atrial flutter. And if you look at the pattern of the scar in the atria, it's pretty clear that they've had pulmonary vein isolation in the past, but it seems like that pulmonary vein isolation was incomplete, right? The scar doesn't perfectly encapsulate both of the sets of pulmonary veins. And so that could be a reason that they came back and presented with subsequent flutter. So we want to take this patient that's presenting with flutter, and we want to model that flutter in our computer so that we can try and treat it in the computer before we treat it in the patient. To do this requires a lot of inputs. So we already talked about how we have the input geometry and substrate information. We also have to make assumptions about the electrophysiology of the cells throughout the heart. And we also have to make assumptions about the structure of the cells throughout the heart. So like the fiber orientation, all that stuff. And we need to take all that, plug it into some sort of simulation framework. In this case, we used OpenCarp, which is an open source simulation framework, and use that to get a simulation result. So in this case, I'm going to show you what one of the simulation results look like. So we're going to take this atria, we're going to stimulate it at some point, and we're going to do a arrhythmia induction protocol where we're going to give it a train of S1 pulses and then a premature S2 pulse. And this is going to, in theory, introduce some sort of reentrant arrhythmia. And for the purposes of our simulation, we went and did this at many different places throughout the atria. I'm just going to show you one of the ones where it successfully induced a flutter arrhythmia. Or at least I'm going to try to. Never mind. My computer really doesn't like these to do the presentation mode on this particular speaker for some reason. Apologies for the delay. So there you can see that is the atrial geometry that we talked about before. And then I'm just going to have this run through and load up some of the data so that we can look at it.
This is the Siren software that you developed.
Say that again?
Siren software.
Oh, yeah. This software is called SkiRun. It's developed in the University of Utah. It can be difficult to use, but it's really powerful for visualization and processing of meshes and stuff. It's somewhat similar to your music software, but also somewhat different from what I've seen. Anyways, okay. Thank you for the distraction. Okay, so as I hit play here, it's going to show a pink wavefront, which is essentially just the wave of activating tissue moving throughout the heart. And we're going to see the last S1 pulse followed by the S2 pulse, and then followed by the reentrant activity. So I'll just hit play there, and we see there that was the S1 pulse, and we're going to see the S2 is going to come here, and then the wave is now going to re-enter, right? And we can see that it's circling around these pulmonary veins. Right, so this particular flutter arrhythmia was actually observed in this patient, right? So this patient actually showed up in the clinic with that exact arrhythmia. So before I go back, I'm just going to load up the other one so that it'll be there when we get to it. Because as you might guess, we tried to fix it in the simulation, and I want to show you those results in a second here. Okay, while that's running. So we can simulate flutter arrhythmias, right? That's great. That's a great first step. And we can actually match them to the ones we observe clinically. We do observe the simulated results and the clinical results agreeing with each other. But in addition to that, we also see a lot of other flutter circuits arise, ones that we don't necessarily see clinically, but ones that might arise later if we terminate the primary circuit. So that can be useful. The problem is that if we want to give the clinicians a tool like this, we also need to give them some understanding of how much they can trust it, right? And the problem with doing all this modeling is there is a ton of assumptions applied in every single one of these steps, and it's not always clear how those assumptions affect the resulting output of our model. It's kind of like baking cookies, right? So this is my favorite analogy for what's called uncertainty quantification. When you go to bake a cookie, there's lots of input ingredients. And depending on the recipe you use or how careful you are that day, or how lazy you are that day, you might include more or less of any of these ingredients. And sometimes that can have a really hard to predict effect on your output, right? Your cookie might change dramatically due to a slight change in the input. Okay, it's a lot like that with modeling, where instead of ingredients here, we have these parameter distributions, right? Where an individual parameter, let's say the conductivity of a tissue, rather than having a fixed value, you actually have a range of possible values that could have some strange looking distribution. And we don't know how this is going to affect the output of our model unless we test it somehow. All right, so this process of taking these probability inputs and running them through our model and getting the output variability is called uncertainty quantification. And using uncertainty quantification, we can get things like parameter sensitivities, we can get output metrics like the standard deviation or quantiles or percentiles or however you want to slice it, any other higher order statistics. And this can give us things like, here is how confident you should be in the solution. Here's how much the solution varies. Here are which parameters are more or less important to the outcome of your solution. So in this case, let's think about a wavefront moving through, and let's think about how we might quantify various aspects of that wavefront to then plug it into uncertain quantification. So let's say I have a region of tissue right here. And I have one set of simulations that gives me an arrhythmia path that goes like that, right? But these other things here, these blobs in the middle, those are all scars, right? So I have a second set of parameters that gives me a completely different pathway. Okay, that's something we could observe in the simulation if we change the parameter slightly. The problem is if you just do a standard kind of like take the average path as your uncertainty analysis, you get a path that's non-physiological, right? So we can't just look at the path of an arrhythmia and use that as our standard metric for how these to plug into these uncertainty quantification analyses. We need something that's more representative of the behavior in a way that makes sense to do statistics on. Okay, so if I were to take, let's say, this flattened model of an atria, because it's got 4 holes and it's got that one scar right there that's between 2 of the pulmonary veins. And let's say I stimulate it from here and I got a reentry activation map that looks something like that, okay? Rather than thinking about how we want to assess this as a metric, let's think about instead, what would we do clinically? I mean, I know not all of us are clinicians, right? But if you saw a reentry pattern like that, where might you burn to terminate it? Right? Me, I'd think, okay, I want to burn the smallest amount of area possible that's going to terminate this circuit. So I might burn right there. Okay. And then that might cause there to be a secondary circuit that goes around like that. So I'll burn the second smallest area that terminates that circuit, which might be over here. Right. And we can go through and do that a number of times until we've burned essentially the critical isthmuses or the critical sections of the wavefront that should terminate the arrhythmia. Okay. So that's one ablation strategy. Another one would be to make connecting lines across all barriers. So, right, you can go from the mitral valve to all of the pulmonaries and connect any scars that you see. And in theory, that should produce no, open pathway that something can rotate around. And we can do these two things automatically. Every time we run a simulation, we can give an ablation pattern that follows these rules. And so, for example, if we do that in our model right here that we were showing earlier, it looks like this with these purple lines here, right? So we see that there's connecting lines between all of the scars, but then there's also these little ablations here between these critical isthmuses. Because it turns out when I simulated a bunch of different arrhythmias, it saw that there was a tiny little wave that moved right through here. And that was identified as a critical isthmus or a critical place that the wave passed through to perhaps try and terminate the arrhythmia. Okay. And so when I did that, right, when I took my model and applied these ablations, I went from having 13 simulated reentries down to 4. Okay. And of the 4 ones that remained, here's an example of one. It was a functional reentry, right? So not something that rotated around a scar, right? So we can see here it comes, S1, S2, and then it should, oh no, wait. Oh, I'm sorry. I just loaded up the same one again. Ignore that. So when I reran the ablation, or when I ran this same ablation pattern and then ran the simulation, I got a wavefront that just circled around in this fibrosis here, right? So that's something that my rules weren't designed to catch. So of course we didn't catch it, but we terminated all of the reentries that rotated around these scars or rotated around these various structures. So I'd call that, something of a win, right? If I show this to a clinician, I can say, here's an ablation pattern that should terminate all structural reentries, and you might have some functional reentries left, but you just use your clinical intuition on how to deal with those. At least it's making some progress. The problem is we need to understand how variability in our input parameters might actually affect these resulting solutions, because I've just shown one answer, right? I've shown the clinician, here's one ablation map based on one set of parameters that I've set for my model. Problem is, if I change a slight parameter in my model, it might completely change where the reentries are showing up. So it might completely change where the ablation sites are. I don't know until I look. So what looking entails is, first I need to pick a parameter, right? So in this case, I'm going to from all of my various parameters of interest, I'm going to pick the conductivity of the tissue. And specifically, I'm going to pick the conductivity not in the healthy tissue, which is anisotropic, but I'm going to pick the conductivity in the fibrotic tissue, right? Because I'm pretty uncertain about this value, right? I don't have a good sense for how slow fibrotic conductivity in the atria should be, especially not just from an LGE MRI. So I'm going to say I'm pretty uncertain about this. I'm going to take these 3 parameters for the longitudinal sheet and normal conductivity. I'm just going to collapse them down into 1 because they're pretty much, it's isotropic, we're modeling it as. But I'm going to say they could vary plus or minus 0.06, so almost plus or minus 100% of what they currently are, right? Because I'm pretty uncertain about it. But I'm also going to give a kind of normal looking distribution, because I'm saying, I think that I have close to the right answer, but it could vary. Right, it could vary normally around this center conductivity that I'm giving. So now that I have this definition, I want to say, what does my model output look like under the assumption that it is this uncertain about this particular parameter? So when we do that, we can run all of this through. Oh, yeah, okay. I guess I'll go through those slides. We need to take some samples of the parameter, and we need to look at the model output. Now, the problem is, if the response looks like this, how many parameter samples do we need to take? Right? If we just take one sample, then we just get a single answer for the behavior. And that's pretty much what we're doing standard when we don't apply uncertainty quantification. We're just assuming that it's behaving the same way across all different parameter values. If we take 2 samples, that's a little bit better, but we're kind of missing the nuances of this behavior. If we take many, many samples, right, then we will get a much better understanding, but this is computationally inefficient. Some of these simulations can take hours to run, and we don't have time to run thousands of them, especially if we're uncertain about more than just one thing. So what we actually need to do is sample it a little bit more intelligently. We need to sample it in a way that's mathematically optimized, and we do that through a process called polynomial chaos expansion. The short of this is that we can use some ideal math problems or in statistical analysis to say, here are the samples that I need to pick to best describe the behavior of my model according to a mathematical statistical understanding of how these processes work. I can take samples at those models, build an underlying emulator, and then sample that to death, and then run all my statistics that I want afterwards. And so we have a Python package for doing this that's open source if anyone else wants to use it. And so the nice thing is that once I've plugged in all of this information, I can do some uncertainty analysis. This one doesn't take so long to load up because there's just hit play. So the first thing I'll show you is I can say, okay, for those ablation patterns that I had before, right, I can look at the mean value, right? And this is going to be between 0 and 1. So 1 means it's 100% of the time that area is ablated, and 0 means 0% of the time that's ablated. All right. So this, instead of just giving us a binary ablate here, don't ablate there, it kind of gives more of a heat map of here are the areas that are more likely to be successful when ablated, and here are the areas that are less likely to be successful when ablated, assuming a certain level of uncertainty in our output. Okay. In addition to that, we can also have the standard deviation. Oops. So standard deviation is just a measure of how variable an output is, right? So low levels of variability means that it's not changing a lot, whereas high levels of variability means that changes in my input parameter are causing a lot of changes to my output. But for this particular task, I find the thing that's actually the most helpful is the quantile. And so what a quantile is saying, let's say you want to ablate such that you cover 90% of the variability produced by the model, right? Then here's where you should ablate. And so that's what this pattern is showing here. It's saying essentially, if you want to cover 90% of the model's variability, I think you should ablate in all of these regions with varying degrees of, I have the wrong color map on, confidence. Okay, so now we could show this in theory to a clinician with a little bit of explanation on what the math means and have them draw ablation lines that are somewhat guided by the model that's saying, you know, if you ablate in these regions, it's going to terminate the arrhythmia in 90% of the simulations that we saw, or covering 90% of the variability and errors in the model that we have. Okay. So moving forward, we've done this in like one patient. We've done the models in many patients, but we've done this kind of uncertainty analysis in only one patient and only begun to start talking to clinicians and other researchers about it in ways. So we are pretty early in our own, exploration of these results and what they mean and the best way to interpret them. We also want to explore, using not only left atrial models. You'll notice that the model I showed there was just of the left atrium, but biatrial models and what complexity those add. We want better ways to track the wavefront or to track the behavior of the model. Right now, I'm showing this kind of ablate here as a way to characterize the behavior of the arrhythmia, but that's not as direct as, here's where the arrhythmia is versus isn't, or here's the path of it. And of course, we want to take our ablation strategy and improve it to address functional reentries, and then not listed here, but we'd also like to look at more than just one parameter, obviously. I think I forgot to put in a thanks slide. So thanks for listening, everybody. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Thank you for this nice presentation. Any question in the audience?
Thank you very much. I think the uncertainty quantification is a really important thing because we build our models on these like single timestamp and time frame. It's really cool. And you showed that you can look at one single parameter change, but oftentimes there's a lot of things going on, right? From the cellular level to the tissue level. do you have a smart way in this software to explore a combination of parameters in a very efficient manner?
Yeah, so it is as many dimensions as you want it to be. The polynomial chaos expansion. Can't remember if this slide showed it. Okay, it doesn't. But one of the things it naturally gives as an output, like let's say you have 3 parameters or 6 parameters or 9 parameters of interest, it will not only give you the like sensitivity for each of those 1 parameters, but it also give you the combination sensitivity by 2s, by 3s, by 4s, like all of the combinatorics of that, it will spit out. Just the more parameters you ask for, the more samples it's going to need to develop that. It's of course, orders of magnitude fewer samples than if you were to do like Monte Carlo or a grid search or something like that. But as you increase the number of parameters, it does get more and more. But yeah, it's natively built to be able to handle, more than just the simple 1 parameter case. Because in theory, the simple 1 parameter case you could get just through a grid search if it's a sufficiently, narrow parameter range.
Then you said on your last slide you want to try a bunch of different models. Are they a lot bigger than what you're testing these things? Like what's the max that you push this thing so far? Like what's the maximum size model that you're able to do?
As far as like the actual, like the simulation model itself or the number of parameters?
The number, just 1 parameter and the model itself size, for example, because you're showing atrial models. Have you done anything in the ventricles yet or with volume, things like that?
Yeah. So, and this is a volumetric atrial model, I should mention, but yes. So we've done stuff in the ventricles, but mostly with the iconal model. We've done a little bit with this in the ventricles, but it's not the size of it that matters, right? You can run it offline. The tool tells you here, you tell it, here's what my parameters are, and here's what the distribution and all that stuff looks like. And then the tool says, okay, I want you to go run your model at these, 60 or 100 or whatever parameter values, and then give me the answer, like the model's outputs for each of those. So it's up to you to go run those offline on whatever computer is needed to accomplish that, given the size of your model. So it can be theoretically run with any size model as long as you have the compute power to do it. As far as the largest we've ever done, in working with Carly, I think she's done full, 4-chamber models.
I have one question, a basic question. How do you have a way to know if a parameter is by the way you decide to model a phenomenon is a good way to model this phenomenon? My example is, for example, for the scar tissue. So we decided, as far as I understood, to model the scar tissue by its conductivity, so slow the conductivity inside the scar tissue, but maybe it's not the good way to model the scar tissue. So do you have a tool to validate the fact that the choice that you make is the good one?
Yeah, that's why I struggle with that sometimes too, because I've seen people present other ways to model scar, rather than having it be lower conductivity, to change it to a different cell type or make it inert or something like that. And I would say that the best method that I've seen for that is, does it replicate the clinical or experimental behavior that you care about for the particular use case of the model? There's not necessarily you could perhaps formulate the problem in a way that you could address with this uncertainty quantification tool, but I think the more common way that I see that approached is, let's say you have a clinical measurement. You say you know what a patient's reentrant pathway looks like, and if the way that you modeled the scar produces that same reentrant behavior, then the model is at least good enough to do that. If it's good enough to do whatever else you care about, that's a harder question to answer. And I think it depends on what you want to use the model for. If the only thing you want the model to do is to represent like a block of tissue that an arrhythmia can go around, then there's, varying degrees of complexity. And I would say the simplest one that gets that done is probably good enough, but it's not going to replicate the same behavior of scar tissue responding to, certain types of treatment or certain types of energy application, things like that. So I think you touched on a really hard problem, I feel like, in the modeling field.
And the validation of uncertainty quantification will be very hard, because how will you validate this? Because you say that if you want to ablate, but this is the area you should ablate if you want to access maximum success. But at the end, with a given patient, you would do something that would change the patient status. So we're gonna then have something else. So it will. How will you validate this with patients? You will have to make multiple experiments on multiple patients each time with a single experiment. You know what I mean? It's difficult because you give a statistical answer to a problem that is, and you will have a single ablation strategy for a given patient.
Yeah, I think that because the way we've been thinking about how we're going to validate it going forward is at the end of the day, the clinician is going to decide to do something discrete, right? They're going to do something, like you say, it's going to change how the patient behaves or responds. And the two ways that we can compare it to our own data is we can apply the same ablation pattern that the clinician applied, and we can rerun the model and see how the model behaves, and then compare that to how the patient ended up behaving. And then we can compare how our predicted outcome of, if we ablate in these regions and the clinician also ablated in those regions, and we think it'll terminate the arrhythmia and then it does, or we think it wouldn't terminate the arrhythmia and then suddenly 3 months later the patient comes back with a new one, then that, it's a loose form of validation. But as far as, you're right in saying that we can't ask the clinicians to ablate everywhere that we tell them to. At the end of the day, they're going to have to make a decision. So it's more of the soft validation of, is this tool useful in clinical decision-making? And if it's not, then we need to go back to our drawing board on what should we be presenting to the clinicians from these models. Because we believe that the models have some useful information, right? But rather than just presenting a single answer of saying, here is the answer that the model said, we want to somehow incorporate some of the variability in the model. So if you have a good idea on the way to present that, be all ears.
Okay, other questions?
I have a last question. Did you think in the future your model can be applied in the mapping software when the patient is on the table, so for the operation, or only before the operation? So
there are some real-time simulation environments, but they don't do this type of arrhythmia very well. These take minutes to run usually, like on the Atria on small meshes, they can take 15 to 20 minutes to run on high performance computers, right? So $50,000 computer needs to run this. So we usually do it at least a few days, if not a week ahead of time. Of course, the goal would be to do this all in real time, but I'm going to leave that to the computer scientists to figure out how to do it. I think the first thing we need to do is, like Remy said, show that it can be useful, validate that it can actually improve the clinical outcome, and then there will be enough motivation to throw enough money at the problem to make it real time. But of course, it'd be cool to see it in there's definitely companies and people who are interested in trying to incorporate simulation tools into the clinical workflow.
Right. Laura?
It seems like the uncertainty would be very dependent on probability distribution that you use for key parameters. And at the moment, there's uncertainty capable of taking another probability distributions out of the Gaussian, and you can't use those distributions appropriately.
It can do any parameter distribution that you can define, like both from the parametric ones to you can give it a bunch of example data and it'll fit its own. As far as how do you choose them, that's a question. It comes down to domain expertise at the moment, right? And ideally you have some sort of set of sample measurements, and then you can fit a distribution of that and go with that. But we usually don't have that. We usually don't have that for almost any of the parameters that we're choosing in these models. So the most fundamental, like the way that the mathematician has guided me in that is he said, if you are somewhat confident in your solution, but you want it to wiggle a little, then you do something like a Gaussian. If you have no idea, then any solution or any parameter is good and you do uniform. And then, after that, it's kind of anybody's guess. So ideally you'd have data to inform your solution or your choice of a parameter distribution because it does matter. Although you can test that, you could run multiple iterations of it. And if it doesn't matter, then that would bear out. That's oftentimes also what one of the goals in the background of all of this is to run uncertainty quantification on as many of these parameters in the model as possible. In theory, if we shake that enough, some of them are going to come out to be not impactful, right? Like maybe the conductivity of this type of tissue or this particular cell parameter doesn't matter. So you can just set it to a value and forget about it. That's a useful output, but there will be a series of them for which it will matter and the distribution will matter. And addressing that is difficult.
Okay, thank you. Thanks again. And thank you for this very nice session. So I hope you enjoyed your stay in Bordeaux, and maybe we'll see you next year, same place. Huh? Thank you again.